Okay, let's continue. Next exercise is exercise 3, which asks you to apply these ideas. And as I mentioned before, most of this will be based on our formula, aggregate demand, which consists of 3 components: consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports. And now let's just apply this formula and respond to these questions. So what will happen to the level of national income, which is national output and GDP, if the following changes occur? So let's have a look. Firms are encouraged by lower interest rates to build new factories. Lower interest rates implies that cost of borrowing are lower, cost of borrowing drop, which will encourage investments. In other words, one of the components in our aggregate demand will increase, aggregate demand itself will go up, and now we can actually sketch a diagram to represent this idea. If this was our aggregate demand, this was our national income, and this was actually our variable in question. We've been asked to illustrate the effect on national income. What will happen to national income? Remember, this is the same as national output, the same as national expenditure, and the same as GDP. So all measures of output are plotted along horizontal axis. And there was a separate video lesson explaining why this is the case, right? And we also have price level along vertical axis. All other things remain unchanged. So this is our aggregate supply curve. The original equilibrium is at point 1. Some original price level, some original national output. What we also see is that due to lower interest rates, due to high investment level, aggregate demand will increase. In other words, aggregate demand curve will shift upwards, and we will be operating on a higher aggregate demand curve, which will push our equilibrium from point 1 to point 2. And as a result, we will have different levels of national output and price level. In other words, we can see that prices will go up, but so will national output. National output will increase due to high aggregate demand, and aggregate demand is higher due to higher investment. In other words, due to lower interest rates and increasing investment, aggregate demand will be higher, which will push national income up. It will increase. That's why the answer is rise. And you follow the same logic to answer all other questions. It's very simple. You operate through your aggregate demand formula. As I said, it's the most important formula in macroeconomics, which explains so many different things. And you just need to become familiar with it and get comfortable with it. It's not difficult, and it explains so much. So let's have a look at the second question. Consumers abroad are deterred by high price for the pound from buying imports from the UK. It's not our imports, it's their imports, which is our exports. Their imports, what they import, is our exports, is what we export. They are deterred from buying our products. They don't import anything from us. We cannot sell anything to them, which reduces our exports, what we sell to foreigners. So our exports will fall, which will affect our net exports. So the difference between exports and imports. When exports drop, net exports will drop too, which will reduce aggregate demand, not increase it. So the diagram will be the opposite one: initial aggregate demand, price level, national output, aggregate supply, initial equilibrium at point 1, initial national output, initial price level. Then our aggregate demand, let's use maybe green color here, then our aggregate demand drops, which will shift aggregate demand curve downwards to aggregate demand 2. Equilibrium will move to point 2 towards lower price level and lower national output. So questions like this can be slightly confusing, and you need to be careful with the direction, especially when we talk about international trade and exchange rates. It's slightly confusing, but basically that's an idea. National output here drops due to lower aggregate demand. National output falls. It's a reduction in national output because our exports has decreased. Next exercise. Both taxation and government expenditure are reduced. This is quite interesting because there are two factors here. Taxes drop and government expenditure drops as well. There will be different effects on aggregate demand because lower taxes will increase disposable income, which increases consumption, while a reduction in government expenditure will reduce aggregate demand straight away. It's a component of aggregate demand. Let's recall, aggregate demand is a sum of consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus net exports. Consumption increases, which will provide a boost to aggregate demand, while government expenditure drops, which will reduce aggregate demand. So we will have two effects in different directions, up and down. And as a result, we don't actually know what will be the combined effect. These two effects contradict each other, and we don't know without further information how it will work out, which impact will be stronger. We have one push up and one push down. When the scale of the government and the economy is reduced, people will have more money in their pockets because they pay less taxes. However, there will be less public services provided. Government will not place additional orders, will cancel previous orders. So some companies worked for the government. For example, they are building the train station now. They are paid by the council. They are paid by the government institutions. So now government cancels all these projects, and these people won't get paid, and some product will not be produced. So we don't know what the combined effect will be. Stronger influence from consumers or stronger effect of lower government expenditure. So we don't know without further information. Impossible to tell. Next question. People decide to save a larger proportion of their income. So let me do it this way. Savings. Larger savings, people save more, implies lower consumption. Why is that? Because we have fixed income, let's say £1,000, and we split it between consumption and savings in different proportions. We have no other sources of money. We have some amount coming in, and we decide what to do with it. And the more we save, the less we have to spend. So generally, larger savings rate implies lower consumption, which will reduce aggregate demand. And as we've learned already, second graph, lower aggregate demand will reduce national production level. Lower demand, less output will be produced to satisfy it. So generally, national output as a result will go down. Why is that? Because savings, as you remember, is a withdrawal, is a leakage withdrawal from the circle of flow. We've covered this in the first exercise. The more we save, the less output will be produced. Output will fall. And the final exercise, our trading partners abroad begin to recover from recession. Let's imagine that we trade with Europe and Europe is booming. What does it mean? It means that there will be stronger trade flows between us and Europe. Europeans will buy more of products because they feel richer. They are going out of recession. Their income is increasing. They will buy more of everything. They will buy more of their own products, and they will import more as well. They will buy some of our products as well, which we produce. For example, some may prefer to buy our Jaguar cars. They have income. They can buy more of our products. More European families will send their kids to British universities, or they will use our financial services, and so on. So when our trading partners become richer, this will allow us to sell more products to them. So generally, it implies that our exports will go up. Our exports is what they purchase. So because our exports increases, our net exports, the component of aggregate demand, will go up, which will increase aggregate demand as well. And this will increase national output. So total output in our economy will now increase. It's beneficial for us when our trading partners are richer because they will be able to buy more of us. Generally, just think about this. It's quite easy. Would you prefer to have rich customers or poor customers? If you, for example, own a restaurant, would you want your customers to be rich with high disposable income? Probably yes, they will spend more, they will leave larger tips, and you will earn higher profit. Absolutely the same in international relationships. When you trade with the rest of the world, the richer your customers are, the more income and profit you will be able to generate by trading with them. So that's first exercise. Any questions based on that? So you just apply the same logic, just look at the formula aggregate demand, and basically that's all you need to know. It will help you to answer all of these questions. Question 4 is slightly different. It focuses on the difference between actual and potential output. And this is the difference between current increase in output, for example, as shown in this particular diagram, increase from Y1 to Y2, when our output increases in the short run. There is a difference between this and shift in the PPF curve and the true economic growth. So let's recall what PPF curve is. Production possibility frontier, PPF curve, shows how much output we are able to produce when we use the most efficient technology and use our resources effectively. So it shows us different combinations of various goods, let's say good 1 and good 2, which we can produce, the maximum amount of these goods which we can produce. So we can be located somewhere along PPF curve, some different combinations. We can produce lots of good 1 with very little of good 2, or the other way around, or some combination. If we produce somewhere within PPF curve, somewhere on point A, it means that we are underexploiting our capacity. There are some idle resources of the economy. We are not working effectively, and we would be able to increase production and move towards points B or C, for example, right? This movement from A to B or from A to C would represent this particular change. It would represent this movement, increase in output. It means that we are increasing current output. So movements from A to B or A to C represents increase in current output. For example, due to higher demand, due to increase in aggregate demand. While true economic growth would imply that the whole PPF curve shifts outwards, and we are working on a higher PPF curve. So economic growth represents increase in potential output. Potential output. It's a shift from the original PPF to PPF curve new, PPF new. So this is what increase in potential output is. It allows us to increase production of all goods without sacrificing anything. So that's the difference. And increase in production in potential output would actually would also imply increase in aggregate supply. So in our graph, if we try to plot graphs, it will look like this. Current output increases due to shift in aggregate demand. From Y1 to Y2. That's increase in current output. In current output. While to have an increase in potential output, we'll need to shift aggregate supply curve. So this was our original output, and here we'll need to shift aggregate supply curve, which of course will change in equilibrium as well, depending on how exactly we allocate it, because aggregate supply curve has a horizontal component, horizontal section, upward sloping section, and vertical section. But this would imply increase in potential output. Potential output. So any changes here due to shift in aggregate supply curve, because it means that we can produce more. Our supply is potentially higher. And based on these theories, let's try to answer these questions. Exercise 8, reduction in the level of investments. Lower investment is a component of aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus net exports. When investment drops, one of the components of aggregate demand drops, aggregate demand itself will drop as well. Okay, never mind, let it stay. I sometimes press different buttons accidentally, and as a result, I have unwanted marks. So when investment drops, aggregate demand will drop as well, which will reduce national output, actual output will drop. And apart from this, it will also reduce potential output, because low investment implies that we will not be able to replace all our capital, and we will be able to produce less in the future. So potential output will drop as well. Investment is important. We need to maintain and replace obsolete capital, and we'll need to keep adding in order for our output to increase in the future. If we don't do this, if we don't invest, this potential output which we can produce will shrink gradually. So there will be drops in both cases. When people save a larger proportion of their income, it will be slightly different story. Higher savings, it's a paradox of savings. Higher savings imply that consumption will drop in the short run, in the immediate future, in the short run, which will reduce aggregate demand, and it will reduce national output, current output. People don't spend on products, firms can't sell their output, output drops, current output. However, higher savings imply that we have more funds, more capital available to invest in the future, more capital available for future investment, which will increase our production capacity. Production capacity goes up in the future, which implies that our potential output will increase. Potential output will increase. This works both at the country level and at individual person's level. Paradox of savings. This is what I've mentioned already. Current output will drop, but potential output will increase. Same with individuals. Let's imagine that you are currently on a low income. Let's say you earn £1,000. It's not a lot, especially if you need to pay your rent, you need to pay your bills, you need to pay for food, for travel, and everything. So generally, you usually when you're on a low income, you don't want to save a lot. You just have better, more important preferences. You have more important priorities. You work so hard that you want to treat yourself sometimes. But the problem is, if you don't start saving early, you won't be able to enjoy nice, comfortable retirement. If you spend all the income which you earn and don't put anything aside, by the time when you need this money, by the time when you cannot work, your standards of living will drop dramatically, especially if you don't invest your savings. If you put your money in a stock market, they will grow and you will be able to benefit from the compound interest. And every single pound invested when you are young, in your 20s, can grow to tens of thousands by the time when you retire. And basically, by spending this money now, you are depriving yourself of wealth in the future. So generally, you are making intertemporal choices. Higher savings at the moment will reduce your current consumption, will reduce your current standards of living, but they will boost your future wealth dramatically. And you need to find a balance between your current consumption and your future consumption. The same is with countries. Countries need to balance their savings rate in order to achieve the optimal current production level and future potential output. Paradox of savings. Next, increased expenditure on education and training. Should be C actually. C. Increased expenditure on education and training will increase both. Increased education. It's likely to be an extra spending by households or by the government. So someone funds this extra spending, extra investment in training. You could be paying for your education by yourself, or it could be scholarship from the government or from this company or from some other source. In any case, this will be an extra income for the university, and extra services will be produced, which will increase GDP in the economy. So increasing education will increase current output, current production level, current GDP. It will go up. However, increasing education will increase your skill set. Your skills are higher, which will increase the human capital in our economy. And human capital is actually amount of the skills which we all possess contributes towards our production capacity. Our economic growth depends on the quantity of factors of production and their quality. When we train, when we acquire additional skills, we will be able to produce more in the future. So increasing human capital will expand our production capacity in the future. So potential output will increase as well. So actually, expenditure on education and training is a really good form of investment because it allows you to increase both current and potential output. You don't need to make any sacrifices like with the savings. Next one, D, discovery of new, more efficient techniques which could benefit industry generally. For actual output, it might increase or there might be no effect, but potential growth will definitely rise, because more efficient techniques will not necessarily imply increase in output. It might reduce cost of production for the company, but not necessarily will result in higher production. It might increase, but not necessarily. But potential output will definitely grow, because the more efficient we are, the less resources we will require to produce the same amount of output overall in the future, in the longer term, and we will be able to produce more. So potential growth will be higher. Reduction in interest rates. Actual output will increase. So let's put it F, which we've covered already. Lower interest rates, lower cost of borrowing, higher investment in the economy, higher aggregate demand, which will result in higher current output. So current output will go up. But apart from this, potential growth will also rise, because when costs of borrowing are low and companies are investing for the future, it will increase production capacity in the economy. So high investments will also increase potential output in the future. We create additional capital, additional capacity, potential output, by investing into our machinery, equipment, and so on. And as a result, potential output will increase. So basically, this gives you an idea. Some quite simple questions based more or less on common sense. And if you get something like this in the exam, you should be able to answer this even if you haven't studied the topic in so much details. Most important thing which you definitely need to know is the formula for aggregate demand, and the difference between current growth and output, and economic growth. Economic growth implies that your potential output increases, and it mainly depends on the rate of technological progress.